2 years ago, I was living on autopilot, stuck in a version of myself I barely recognized. I'd wake up already tired, reach for my phone without thinking, disappear into scrolling for way too long, drag myself through work on fumes, come home drained, order whatever was fastest, sink into a show until midnight, then do it all again the next day. It felt like my life was happening nearby, but not quite to meet me. Like I was present in body but absent in control. I wasn't crashing, I wasn't exploding, I was just stuck. What changed everything wasn't some dramatic wake-up call or overnight reinvention. There was no single moment where I suddenly became disciplined or motivated. What shifted my entire trajectory was something almost uncomfortably small. I started trying to get just 1% better each day. That idea messed with my head in the best way because when you really think about it, 1% feels meaningless, almost too small to matter. But that's the trick. If you improve by 1% every day for a year, you don't end up a little better, you end up radically different. Not by hundreds of percent, but by thousands. That's compound growth, the same force that builds wealth over time, except this time, it's working on your habits, your energy, your confidence, your life. But here's the part nobody explains clearly enough. The power of 1% has almost nothing to do with numbers. It has everything to do with identity. Every small action you take is a quiet vote for the type of person you're becoming. When you make your bed, you're voting for someone who brings order instead of chaos. When you read a single page, you're voting for someone who values growth. When you move your body for even a few minutes, you're voting for someone who respects their health. Change doesn't come from dramatic promises you can't keep. It comes from these tiny, almost boring decisions that will slowly decide who you are. So the real question isn't whether you can flip your life around overnight, because you can't. The real question is this: who are you voting for with the choices you're making every single day? Let me show you what my mornings used to look like before any of this changed. The alarm would go off, I'd hit snooze, then hit it again, sometimes 3 times, until I finally rolled out of bed, already feeling behind. First move was always my phone, straight into notifications, messages, feeds, anything that pulled my attention outward. 30 minutes would disappear without me even noticing. Then I'd rush to get ready, skip breakfast, or grab something terrible, and walk into work, tense, scattered, and already stressed. By 9 in the morning, I'd cast a whole stack of votes without realizing it. Votes for someone who procrastinates. Votes for someone who lets other people's priorities come first. Votes for someone who ignores their body and reacts instead of choosing. None of this made me a bad person. I wasn't lazy or broken. I was just repeating a pattern that kept reinforcing an identity I didn't actually want. Every morning felt like an election, and somehow I kept putting the least qualified version of myself in charge. So I stopped trying to overhaul my life and decided to do something much simpler. I flipped the script, but in the smallest way possible. Instead of forcing myself into extreme routines or impossible schedules, I focused on getting 1% better in just a few areas. And I made those changes so small they were almost impossible to resist. The first change was almost laughably simple. I moved my phone charger out of my bedroom. That was it. No apps deleted, no strict rules, no willpower battles. My phone just wasn't within arm's reach anymore. The tiny shift created a pocket of quiet in the morning where I wasn't immediately absorbing everyone else's thoughts before my own. For the first time in a long while, I could actually notice what it felt like to wake up. The second change took even less effort. I started putting a glass of water next to my bed before going to sleep. When I woke up, instead of grabbing my phone, I drank the water. In that moment, I wasn't just hydrating. I was casting a vote for being someone who takes care of their body before sacrificing their attention. It took maybe 10 seconds, but the signal it sent was powerful. Neither of these changes felt impressive. They required no motivation and almost no discipline, yet they quietly reshaped my mornings. Within a week, something unexpected happened. Because I wasn't diving straight into my phone, I started becoming aware of my energy instead of numbing it. Because I started the day with a better choice, the next choice felt easier. Small wins have a strange way of building momentum, like your brain starts saying, "Oh, this is who we are now," and begins acting accordingly. That momentum made space for a third tiny habit. I started making my bed every morning. Not because it's magical or because it suddenly fixes your life, but because it's a completed action. Before breakfast, before work, before anything could go wrong, I'd already finished something. I'd already voted for being the kind of person who follows through. 3 small changes, maybe 2 minutes total, but together they shifted how my mornings felt. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't reacting to the day as it happened to me. I was moving with intention, calm instead of chaos, direction instead of drift. My identity in the morning had quietly changed, and everything downstream started to feel different. Once the mornings were working, I took the same 1% approach into my evenings. Before, nights were where discipline went to die, hours disappearing into endless scrolling or one more episode turning into 4. So I built what I call a shutdown ritual. Nothing dramatic, just a few micro changes designed to help my brain power down instead of spin up. The first evening shift was setting a phone alarm for 9 p.m. I labeled it digital sunset. When it went off, screens went off too, not forever, just for the last hour of the day. That single boundary gave my nervous system room to slow down instead of staying wired on whatever chaos the internet was serving. The second change was laying out my clothes for the next day. 30 seconds of effort, but it meant the next morning I was voting for being prepared instead of panicked. The third change was writing down 3 things that went well that day. Nothing fancy, no deep prompts, just 3 small wins. This trained my brain to close the day by noticing what worked instead of replaying what didn't. Over time, that simple practice softened the mental noise I used to carry into bed. After a few weeks, something surprising started happening. These changes weren't staying contained to mornings and nights. Because I wasn't draining myself with late-night screens, I had more clarity during the day. Because I started my mornings with completion, I wanted my space to reflect that order. None of this felt forced. It felt natural, like my behavior was catching up to a new version of who I believed I was. The shift became obvious when I looked at how I saw myself. I wasn't someone just trying to do better anymore. I was becoming someone who prepared, someone who responded instead of reacted, someone who created stability instead of hoping for it. Each 1% improvement made the next one easier, like the habits were stacking on top of each other without friction. With my personal routine stabilizing, the next place I applied the same principle was work. Before, my days felt chaotic, like I was busy from start to finish but never actually moving forward. So I stripped it down to the smallest possible changes. The first was starting each day by writing down the 3 tasks that mattered most. Not a massive list, just 3 outcomes that would make the day successful. The second change was batching my email. I stopped letting it interrupt me constantly and checked it at specific times instead. That one adjustment freed up more mental energy than I expected. The third change was taking a 5-minute walk between major tasks. No workout plan, no pressure, just movement and a mental reset. Those small resets kept me calmer, clearer, and far more focused than I'd been in years. What I didn't expect was how these small changes would spill into my relationships. Because I wasn't constantly overwhelmed, I had more patience. Because I was sleeping better, I was more present. Taking care of myself in quiet ways gave me more to offer the people around me. So I applied the same 1% mindset there too. Instead of trying to be deep or perfect, I focused on consistency. I asked one genuine question when talking to people. I sent one thoughtful message each week to someone I cared about. No pressure to be extraordinary, just small, steady effort. Over time, those investments compounded. People responded differently because I showed up differently. Conversations felt warmer. Connections felt easier. It wasn't about becoming a new person overnight. It was about becoming slightly more intentional. Again and again, until that intention became natural. This wasn't a smooth upward climb. There were mornings I slept through my alarm and nights I fell right back into old habits. Some workdays completely unraveled because of things I couldn't control. But the 1% rule changed how I interpreted those moments. Progress stopped being about perfection and started being about recovery. Instead of telling myself I'd failed and might as well quit, I learned to reset faster. A missed day wasn't a disaster. It was information. I stopped waiting for Mondays to start over and started choosing to get back on track the very next day. The goal was never to avoid slipping. It was to shorten the distance between falling off and stepping back on. Bad days only undo progress if you let them rewrite the story. One unhealthy meal doesn't define your health. One unproductive day doesn't define your discipline. What matters most is the meaning you attach to those moments, because that meaning determines whether you spiral or continue. After about 6 months, I looked back and barely recognized my life. Not because of any dramatic breakthrough, but because hundreds of small changes had quietly multiplied into something powerful. My mornings went from rushed and chaotic to steady and grounded. My workdays shifted from constant stress to focused momentum. My evenings became a place to recharge instead of escape. My relationships changed too, from surface-level exchanges to moments that actually felt connected. But the biggest shift wasn't visible from the outside. It was how I saw myself. I went from believing I'd lacked discipline to trusting myself to follow through. From always feeling behind to feeling prepared. From hoping things would work out to actively shaping them. That identity shift changed everything. When you see yourself as someone who shows up, showing up stops feeling like a fight. The 1% improvements didn't just change my habits. They rewrote the story I was living inside. So here's where you start. Not everywhere, not all at once. Pick one area of your life that feels stuck and look for the smallest possible improvement you could make. Not the most impressive change, not the one that sounds good to other people, the one that feels almost too easy to skip. If you want to move your body more, don't commit to an intense routine. Commit to putting on your shoes. If you want to read, don't promise yourself a book a week. Promise yourself one page. If eating better matters to you, don't rebuild your entire diet overnight. Start with one glass of water before a meal. The goal is to make the habit so small that resistance barely shows up. That's how you know it's sustainable. That's how you know you found your 1%. Start small on purpose. Because consistency doesn't come from intensity. It comes from making choices you can repeat, even on your worst days. Here's my promise to you. If you commit to getting 1% better each day for the next 90 days, your life will not look the same. The person you are right now is the result of thousands of small choices you've already made. And the person you'll be a year from now is being shaped by the choices you make starting today. You get to cast that vote every single day. Not once. Not when motivation hits, but in the ordinary moments that usually feel insignificant. The question isn't whether change is possible. It's which version of yourself you're quietly reinforcing. So ask yourself this. What's the one small action you're willing to take tomorrow morning? Something simple, something doable. Something that moves you forward just a little. Because your future isn't built in dramatic leaps. It's built in these moments, stacked 1% at a time. If this idea shifted how you see your own habits, share it with someone who feels stuck but can't explain why. Drop a comment and name your 1% starting point, the smallest change you're committing to tomorrow. And if you want more conversations like this, about understanding yourself before forcing change, subscribe and stay here with Unstuck Nation. Your future self is already living with the consequences of the choices you're making today. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to overhaul your life overnight. You just need to be 1% better. And that starts now.